one of the most prestigious magazines in all of Korea, and Jiwon worked as a fashion editor. But today, she was happier than ever. She had finally achieved her dream. Today, she was moving into her dream apartment. Although she was in debt for now, she didn't mind. She ran into a neighbor who, upon hearing which apartment Jiwon would live in, shared an interesting bit of gossip. Apparently, 2 men lived next door to her, and rumors said they were a couple. Some even said they were adoptive parents. Jiwon was curious, but for now, the most important thing was to enjoy her new home. The next day, she woke up late, and it just so happened to be the day she would meet the new chief editor. They said he had previously worked for Vogue in France. His name was Shin, but many called him David. Shortly after she arrived at the office, the new boss called for a meeting. When Jiwon saw him, she was stunned. The new editor-in-chief was the same man she had met 3 months ago in France. 3 months ago, Jiwon had taken a trip to France to immerse herself in the culture and see the landscapes. One night, however, a pickpocket almost stole her passport. Shin had saved her from that situation. He caught the thief and returned her passport. Jiwon was amazed by how handsome he was, though his voice had been stern and not very kind. He had said, "It seems you're as innocent as you are foolish. From now on, keep your bag close to your chest." Jiwon thanked him for his help, but she had been so distracted by his good looks that she didn't even realize he had insulted her. On impulse, as she watched him walk away, she stopped him and asked him to have a drink with her. And after that, well, she had her first one-night adventure. How could Jiwon forget? She had traveled to France after finding out that her ex had cheated on her. She was open to new experiences, acting impulsively without worrying about anything. But she doubted that the man would remember her. There was no denying it, though. Her boss was incredibly attractive. Her boss caught her attention, asking if it was common for her to arrive late. Jiwon tried to explain herself, but Jiwon had no filter. He bluntly told her that her outfit today was terrible. Jiwon tried not to give it much thought. Just because she had spent one night with him didn't mean anything. Besides, he was her boss now. But her boss wanted to make one thing clear. As a fashion editor, she should have a direct impact on trends. But today, she didn't look the part. As he passed by, he said in French, "Look at yourself." Later, Jiwon left work feeling frustrated. Running into her one-night stand had been bad enough, but now he was her boss. Just then, someone grabbed her arm. It was Jiwon, who had been waiting for her. He wanted to ask her something personal. How does it feel to leave without saying goodbye? Jiwon didn't understand until he mentioned that he had a photographic memory. So he remembered everything. Besides, how could he forget? She had left without a word. Back then, Jiwon had panicked. She had never done anything like that with a man before, and didn't know how to handle it, so she ran away. But she didn't tell Jiwon this. She simply apologized. He didn't care much about that anymore. He was happy to see her, but wanted her to understand that what had happened between them was a private matter. After all, he reminded her, he wasn't made editor at Vogue for nothing. The truth was, what had happened between them in France had been special. They had even shared many things in common, but it was something she needed to forget. Later, as Jiwon headed up to her apartment, she met her neighbor, Ha-jun, who was with a little girl named Sol. Jiwon was stunned by how handsome Ha-jun was, but when she realized they were going to the same floor, it dawned on her that he was one of the men she had heard about, the adoptive parents. She said out loud how much she admired them for being so brave and supportive, then hurried off to her apartment before Ha-jun could correct her. The following night, the CEO of the magazine held a banquet to welcome the new editor-in-chief. Jiwon was getting ready, but as she rushed out of her apartment, she accidentally bumped into a child. She quickly reached out to catch him. But before Jiwon could fall, her boss swooped in to rescue her. He quickly picked up the child and, in a gentle voice, asked if he was okay. This shocked Jiwon even more. How could he be so sweet with kids? But after handing the child back, he returned to his usual cold self, warning Ji-woon that she was still walking a fine line. Later, everyone was eating, but in the middle of it all, Ji-woon's phone rang, catching her boss's attention. She excused herself and answered the call. It was her ex, So-min, drunk and begging for forgiveness. Furious, Ji-woon told him never to call her again. But out of nowhere, Ji-woon appeared, snatched the phone from her and told the cockroach never to call Ji-woon again, and if he had a problem, he could come meet them at the hotel. Jo-min asked who he was talking to, and Jo-min calmly replied, her future husband. Jo-min was left speechless, while Jo-min walked away as if nothing had happened. Ji-won couldn't think straight. Seeing him and hearing his voice made her remember France. That day, after drinking with him, Ji-won had offered to walk her back to her hotel, but Ji-won couldn't trust a stranger, though the fact that he didn't push her made her trust him more. She caught up with him and invited him to her room. For Ji-won, she was the first woman who had ever made him cross such boundaries. Meanwhile, Ji-min returned home, where everyone assumed he was in a relationship with Ho-jun, but the truth was they weren't a couple. The little girl, Sol, just called him Daddy, and he didn't care about the rumors. The only thing that mattered to him was seeing Sol happy. Weeks passed, and the team prepared for the November edition of the magazine. The big boss, Ji-min, was waiting for ideas, but everyone presented lackluster suggestions, that is, until Ji-min proposed something. With Firefighters' Day approaching, she suggested hiring real firefighters and creating a photo shoot with fire to raise awareness about fire hazards. Ji-min immediately asked everyone to leave with their useless ideas, except for Miss Chu, the only one who contributed something valuable. Once they were alone, Ji-min started acting a bit bold, asking her to come closer, reminding her of that night. That night in France, Ji-won had rushed back to her hotel and jumped into the shower, not because of what they did, but because she was scared. What had made her invite a stranger to her room? Maybe it was the heartbreak, being in a foreign country, or the fact that this man was incredibly handsome. It had driven her crazy. A while later, she came out of the bathroom and asked if he also wanted to shower. He did. Afterward, they drank and drank until Ji-won lost control. She started telling him about her breakup and how her ex had cheated on her, but as she stared at Ji-won's handsome face, with the alcohol making everything seem even more perfect, she lost her composure and asked him to kiss her. Before things went further, Ji-won asked, "Do you really not have a girlfriend?" Ji-min replied, "No, not all of us are like your ex." With that, Ji-won decided to have a one-night stand with someone she thought she'd never see again. Later, Ji-won was heading back home and bumped into Ha-jun again. She asked him how his partner and their daughter were doing. Ha-jun recalled that Ji-won had told him not to confirm or deny anything, to just let the rumor of them being a couple continue. After all, they didn't care what people thought. So, Ha-jun simply replied that they were doing fine. They chatted for a while about work, and Ha-jun mentioned he was a doctor specializing in liposuction. After the conversation, Ji-won went home, but she still hadn't told him her name. However, his flirty smile gave her a bad feeling. Meanwhile, Ji-min arrived at Sol's grandmother's house to pick her up, bringing her favorite flowers. Jejin's favorite. He still remembered her, and it felt like any moment she would walk out to greet him. He knew he could never forget her. Later, as Ji-min drove Sol home, the little girl told him not to cry. He wasn't crying, but it seemed she could sense his emotions. He gave in and comforted her as she cried, not wanting her daddy to be sad. Ji-min reassured her that he wasn't crying, so she shouldn't either. He knew Sol was just like her mother. They arrived home, and Sol had already fallen asleep. After tucking her into bed, Ha-jun and Ge-man talked. Ha-jun mentioned that he had met their new neighbor and that she'd already heard the rumor about them. They joked about who the husband was, with Ha-jun suggesting Ge-man play the part while he would be the wife. But Sol was only Ha-jun's daughter. Ha-jun also reminded Ji-min that he needed to let go of Jejin. It had been 3 years since her death, and it was time to let her rest in peace. Just then, Sol woke up, having had a nightmare. She asked what was wrong, saying she saw her daddy crying again. Jian tried to calm her down, saying he wasn't crying, but Sol insisted that if he wanted to cry, he should. She didn't want him to hold back for her sake. This touched him deeply. Her heart was so sweet. The next day, Jian arrived at work, but to her frustration, the cockroach, her ex, Seo-min, showed up, demanding to talk to her since she hadn't been answering his calls. Jian was frustrated because she had done so much for him, and she wanted to get away before she lost her temper, but just as he grabbed her arm, her hero, Seo-min, appeared. He warned Seo-min that he was the man Jian would marry, so he needed to leave immediately. Seo-min, overhearing this, judged Jian, accusing her of getting engaged so soon, only 4 months after their breakup. But Jian fired back, telling him that after 5 years of dating, she never really knew him. The argument finally ended, and Seo-min thanked the cockroach. After all, if he hadn't cheated, Seo-min would never have met Jian. With that, they walked away together. At that moment, the idiot grabbed Seo-min, but Seo-min, lowering himself to the guy's level, told him, "Get lost, idiot." After that, Seo-min took Jian by the hand. She didn't understand why he was doing this for her. According to him, it wasn't for her at all. It was just to get her to invite him for a drink tonight, and this time he'd pick the bar. He wanted to go somewhere peculiar where no one would judge him for what he did. They agreed to meet at 8 p.m. That night, they entered the bar, and all the men were staring at Jian, likely because she was making sure no one approached Jian. Jian was curious why Jian was now answering all her questions. Back in France, he hadn't been like this. He seemed different. The reason, as it turned out, was because tomorrow was Jijin's birthday, the hardest day of the year for Jian. It was difficult for him to pretend, so he invited Jian, knowing she wouldn't ask him why he was feeling that way. Jian tried to comfort him, but Jian took the chance to tease her, saying he didn't want anything from her today, reminding her that she had left him traumatized by abandoning him after their night together. Jian responded that this time she just wanted to cheer him up. She didn't fully understand why, but it seemed like he needed a bit of encouragement. Thanks to Jian and Sol, Jian felt a little better, so he thanked her. After that, they went their separate ways. The next day, Jian ran into Hirachell and Sol. Sol asked where her husband was, and Hirachell told her that Jian had been drinking last night and was still at home, sleeping. Jian was surprised that she still hadn't met him, and Hirachell was tempted to tell her that they weren't actually a couple, but he decided not to say anything. After saying goodbye, Hirachell told his daughter, who was still sleeping, that maybe it was time for him to start dating again. Later, Hirachell was at work when Jian called, furious that he hadn't woken him up. But Hirachell wanted to teach him a lesson. Every year, Jian behaved the same way, just because it was his sister's birthday. As the days passed, Jian learned a tough lesson from her boss. He asked her opinion on an outfit for the magazine's cover. She said it was fine, but when he mentioned he wasn't convinced, she quickly agreed with him, which angered him. If this had been an interview, she wouldn't have been hired. She needed to learn to have her own opinion. The work days went by and the weekend arrived. Jian spent it baking and relaxing. Meanwhile, next door, little Sol had a fever. Hirachell rushed over to Jiwan's apartment with Sol, asking her to drive them to the hospital because Sol was very sick. Thankfully, it turned out to be just inflamed tonsils and the scare passed, but Hirachell felt guilty. He was still learning how to be a father. After putting Sol to bed, he thought about his sister's words. She had always intended to raise Sol on her own, knowing she had everyone's support, and didn't need the father. But the day she passed away, he made a promise in front of her photo that he would give Sol a better life. Then Jian arrived, frantic, but Hirachell assured him Sol was okay. Hirachell told him he'd been so scared that he asked the neighbor to help them. But at the same time, Hirachell was furious. Where were you? When you came back from France, you promised we'd raise Sol together. Jian apologized, but Hirachell asked him why, as a doctor, his hands were trembling like that. Jian realized that the two of them were only pretending to be okay. But deep down, both Hirachell and Yeomin were suffering from the loss of Jejin. Hirachell couldn't stop trembling, and Yeomin grabbed his hand, asking him to calm down. In that moment, Yomin realized that if someone saw them like this, the rumors would only get worse. And they did. Because their neighbor saw them. To Yomin's surprise, it was Jian, the famous neighbor who had cheated on her husband. Jiwon quickly understood the relationship between the two. Hajun explained to Yomin that she was the neighbor who knew about the rumors and whom he hadn't had the chance to clarify that they weren't actually together, but they were still holding hands, which only made Jiwon more suspicious. Yomin pulled Jiwon away to talk. She was furious and didn't want to hear any explanations. She couldn't understand why she always ended up with men like this. That comment stung, because in her mind, Yomin hadn't respected their relationship. Jiwon started accusing Yomin of everything, not understanding why she kept getting involved with cheaters. She believed Yomin and Hajun must be in a long, serious relationship, especially since they had adopted a child together. Jiwon felt horrible, thinking she had been part of deceiving Hajun. She wasn't mad that Yomin had cheated. She was mad because it all felt wrong. Jiwon told Yomin they should leave things as they were for Seol's sake, but as far as she was concerned, their personal relationship was over. She walked away, but Yomin hurried after her, telling her to be polite. It takes two people to have a conversation, and he hadn't even spoken yet. He explained that yes, he and Hajun were raising Seol together, but they were just friends, not a couple. He added that if she didn't believe him, he couldn't force her to. Then he handed her his coat, telling her to go home so she wouldn't catch a cold. The next morning, Hajun wanted to explain everything to the neighbor, but Yomin didn't think it was necessary. However, seeing how persistent Hajun was, Yomin realized he didn't want to clear things up for the other neighbors. He wanted to do it because it involved Jiwon. Hajun had been on the verge of telling her everything when the doorbell rang. When Haijun saw who it was, he knew they were in trouble. It was Haibon, Haijun's older brother, a lawyer and the only person in the world who could really get under Yomen's skin. They quickly opened the door, and Yomen immediately understood why Haibon stressed him out so much. He was so imposing. Right away, Haibon made Yomen do push-ups, but with little soul, he was nothing but pure sweetness. That day, Haibon had brought everything they needed for a barbecue. They started asking about Haibon's wife, who works for the government and is always busy. When Haijun asked if everything was fine in their relationship, Haibon gave him a stern lesson about minding his own business. Meanwhile, Seol started playfully hitting her uncle, and Haibon found it adorable. On the other hand, Jian had been thinking it over, and since she had baked some sweet macarons, she decided to offer a few to her neighbors. Just as she was about to knock, Jimin stepped outside and saw her. She offered him the macarons, and in return, she was invited to join the barbecue. They quickly introduced themselves, but soon enough, both Jimin and Haijun were competing for Jia's attention. Jaibon noticed immediately and told them to show good sportsmanship from now on, as fairness and generosity would be essential in any competition they faced. A few days later at work, Jia found herself in an argument with the photographer. She had asked for photos of firefighters that captured their hard work and dedication, but instead she was getting photos of sexy firefighters, which wasn't the concept she wanted. The photographer refused to comply until the big boss arrived. The boss reminded the photographer that he's paid a salary and that the least he could do was adhere to the concepts he was given. The photographer began to complain, but the boss, now irritated, deleted everything they had done and told them to start from scratch. Later, Jia stepped out of the building to rest for a moment on the sidewalk when she saw a call from the cockroach, her ex. She didn't answer, but then he suddenly appeared in person. Jia wanted nothing to do with him, and he told her he had broken up with Hai, which didn't interest her in the slightest. She walked away, but he yelled after her, "Stop pretending to be strong." Jia didn't want to cry over him, especially not a man like him, but her tears began to fall. He tried to apologize for what he had done, but he got the scare of his life when a car jumped the curb, seemingly about to run him over, but stopped just in time. The driver? None other than Jimin. He reminded the cockroach of his earlier warning. The next time he saw him bothering his girlfriend, he'd be in serious danger. Jimin then helped Jia into the car and drove her away. But before leaving, Jian warned the cockroach that next time he wouldn't stop. They were already in the car and Jian was going to take Ji out for a meal, but then he asked why she had left him alone that time. Ji, exhausted, responded by asking when he would stop bringing up what happened in France. They soon arrived at a beautiful place, and the owner, Junil, was a good friend of Jian. Junil introduced Ji as his colleague, but out of nowhere, he started telling Junil that he's bisexual, is in a relationship with Hirachell, and even had an affair with a woman in France. Junil told him to stop being ridiculous, insisting that Jian and Hirachell are a couple. Jian turned to Jia and asked, "Now, do you believe me?" Jia realized he had brought her there just to prove this point, but she didn't understand why he kept saying she should believe him. Getting closer, Jian told her he didn't understand either. He would let anyone else misunderstand the situation, but he hated that she believed something that wasn't true. Meanwhile, Harjan's mother was looking at childhood photos of her kids. She had a best friend who had a child at the same time as she did. She remembered her friend fondly, but it was a shame she had to leave, leaving her young son behind at just 10 years old. Jian's parents had died in an accident, and Harjan's mother had suffered deeply because Jian's mother was not just her best friend, but like a sister. At her funeral, she had promised to take good care of Jian so that her friend could rest in peace. To this day, she still saw Jian as one of her own children. At that moment, she called Hirachell, asking him to arrange a dinner to celebrate Jem's return from France and also to invite Haibon. The next afternoon, the family gathered for the reunion. Jem arrived and everyone was already waiting. Hirachell's mother was like a mother to him, and soon Haibon's wife, Mrs. Jian, also joined them. Of course, Haibon's father, who also treasured Jem, was there as well. They soon began eating. What started as a lovely reunion quickly turned dark. Harjan's father demanded so much from him, pressuring him to raise little Sol properly. But now that Sol was his daughter, Harjan had no intention of letting anyone force her into anything she didn't want. That's how her mother would have wanted it. After this confrontation, everything fell apart. Everyone went their separate ways, even Haibon's wife, who apparently had to return to work, leaving her husband behind once again. Meanwhile, Jian returned to work that evening and was surprised to find Jia still there, working late. He started watching her, noticing how much passion she had for her job. Initially, he had a bad impression of her, but the more he observed, the more he realized how talented she was. Realizing he had been watching her for a while without her noticing, he quickly called out to her. Since she was finishing up, Jian suggested they grab a drink before heading home. They went to the boss's office, where they began drinking. Out of nowhere, Jia told him, "I'm ready to listen to your story." But for Jian, this wasn't necessary. He just needed a little comfort. As if under a spell, Jia moved closer to him, and to his surprise, she kissed him. The night began after Jia had been drinking heavily with Juming. She arrived at his house to drop him off, and he was completely drunk. However, like an angry wife, Harjung was upset and told Jia it would be better to just leave him on the street. Still, he thanked her for bringing Juming home. Harjung then told Jia that she should rest and hinted that he'd like to invite her to dinner sometime. Jia took this moment to ask if it was true that he and Juming weren't a couple. Harjun responded, saying that if they were a couple, he wouldn't be with her now, so they were just friends. This relieved Jia a little. On the other hand, Harjun put Juming in his room, and Juming muttered, "Harjun, stop pitying me, you idiot." The next morning, Jia was heading to work, and there was Juming waiting for her. He pretended not to remember anything, but Jia knew he had a photographic memory. He even told her he didn't recall anything from the previous night, which complicated things, especially since Jia had comforted him, and now he didn't even remember it. Jia was annoyed, but as they left the elevator, Juming slyly said, "Yesterday was better than France." Jia now understood he remembered everything. Later that day, Jia was organizing everything for the company event when she had to listen to Kiva X, the office gossip and troublemaker, go on and on. He was already creating nicknames for the new boss, calling him Taipan, one of the most venomous snakes, and with no antidote for its bite. Not bad. Kiva kept talking until the boss himself approached and overheard the rest. To avoid getting fired, Kiva X was tasked with inflating balloons. The boss then asked Jia if he should forgive Kiva, and she said yes, so the boss told Kiva X that if he still had his job, it was thanks to Jia. That evening the event began, and everything went smoothly. But Jia, with her beauty, caught the attention of some charming men, though she hated flirtatious types and ignored them. At one point, Editor Choi sent Jia to get some surveys from her car. As Jia returned, those guys who had tried flirting with her earlier found her again. They thought they'd get another chance to charm her, but as soon as she got in the elevator, these two idiots stopped it. Minutes passed, and the boss noticed that Editor Choi was leaving. He asked her what was going on, and she explained that she had sent Jia to retrieve the surveys. But it had already taken too long, which scared him. Meanwhile, these two idiots were abducting Jia. Fortunately, the boss arrived just in time, and before anything bad could happen, he quickly knocked one of them down. However, he got distracted when he saw how Jia was, and the other guy took the opportunity to get up and strike him. Jia saw this, but soon lost consciousness. When she woke up, she was in the hospital. Jumi was injured but reassured her that the two men were much worse off. For now, she needed to rest, and then they could press charges against those two. A few days later, Joming asked Jia to come with him to meet H. Bo, who gladly accepted the case. He was one of the best lawyers, and Jia didn't have enough money to pay him, but Jabon would charge her a small fee of $30. He was even willing to help her for free, but since she wasn't happy with that, he only charged a small amount. Jia's gestures made Jabon think of someone in his family, his sister, Jian. The following night, Juming visited Jia. He brought her some fried chicken, which he always bought for Seoul, but he hoped to see Jia tomorrow at work. When he arrived, Jia invited him in to eat together. He agreed, but when they sat down, he let her eat alone, and it felt awkward, like being watched while you eat just isn't comfortable. As they talked, Jia thanked him for helping her hire lawyer Shin, who seemed to be very close to Juming. She then asked about something Shin had told her, that she resembled the lawyer's sister, Jian. At the mention of the name, Juming was stunned. He quickly said goodbye and left. He went to the park, where he thought about the woman he once loved, Jian. She had always been so sweet, and he loved being near her. But for Jian, Juming was just her little brother. She lived her life with optimism and excitement, making him feel so many beautiful things. Yet he never had the courage to confess his feelings, especially because Haijun's family had raised him as one of their own. He couldn't give in to his desires, afraid that if things went wrong with Jian, he might lose the only people who had been like family to him. At that moment, Haijun called him, worried because Jia had come asking about him. Juming had left his apartment in a hurry, and Jia had told him that she had mentioned Jian. He probably felt affected hearing about her. Then Juming asked if Jia resembled Jian for him too. The silence was his answer. Yes. In the beginning, Juming didn't understand why he had been so drawn to her in Paris. But now he understood. That's why he always tried to protect her. That's why he felt butterflies in his stomach when he saw her. He felt guilty for what he had done to Jia. In just a few minutes, Jia, who had been looking for him desperately, arrived, and that truly drove him crazy. 3 years ago, in the winter, Jimin passed away in an accident, just like Juming's parents. He regretted so much not confessing his feelings to her because maybe she would have loved him as much as he loved her. But that's how his intense love ended. When he saw Jia arrive and noticed the cold, they both returned to the building. However, as they were in the elevator, Juming clarified that he wasn't crying. Jia then asked for the lawyer Jaibon's bank details, as she hated owing anyone anything. Juming thought to himself, "She really does resemble Jimin." When they reached the floor, he took off his jacket and handed it back to her before she left for home. Meanwhile, Seol and Haijun were welcoming Juming. Seol told her dad that her other dad ate all the chicken and didn't leave any for her. After putting Seol to bed, Haijun and Juming sat down to talk in the kitchen. It became clear that Juming seemed like a nagging husband to Haijun, But then, Juming began to open up. He wanted to know if it was true that Jia resembled Jiming. This was something Haijun agreed with, as Jia was very similar to his sister. He thought that Joming had also realized this and had opened up to Jia for that reason. But the truth was, Jimin had never noticed this connection. For Haijun there was no problem, but for Jimin there was. Unconsciously he saw Jimin in Jia, and he had fallen for her, which only caused him more pain. He had suffered a lot because of the cockroach, and now he was about to hurt Jia too. He felt like the worst person in the world, but Haijun couldn't understand what the problem was. Then Joming asked Haijun what it felt like to have a family. Haijun thought that was ridiculous. He already had a family. But for Joming, Haijun's family was his family too, and it seemed like Haijun didn't see it that way. The next day, Jia received a call from her mum, who was thinking of sending food with Juming, the one person Jia didn't want to see. After hanging up, Jia realized someone was waiting for her. Juming. Once in the elevator, he told her he had been waiting for 30 minutes and wanted to ask if he could watch her for a few days. After that, he promised he'd explain why. 3 months ago, he had a stable job in France, but he chose to take a job as a runway model just because he missed his home country. Plus, Haijun wanted help raising Seoul. That day, he had decided to stroll around Paris and enjoy the time he had left there. It was then that he saw her. She passed by him and by accident stepped on his foot. But he didn't realize it. Then he found her again in another place. Without thinking, he started watching her until he noticed someone trying to steal her wallet. He intervened. Back in the present, the week for the magazine's Runway release was approaching. It meant hard work, even with extra hours. Though Jie kept thinking about what Juming had asked her, she didn't understand why, out of nowhere, he decided to watch her. He was always near her, wherever she went. One day, Jia and her co-workers were having coffee in the company cafeteria. Out of the blue, they started talking about the boss and what he might be like in a romantic relationship. They thought he was surely imposing, but just then the boss arrived. He overheard everything and approached them. Since Director Choi was the one talking, the boss clarified that she wasn't his type, but he would give Jia a chance, even though Jia wasn't interested. After that, he walked away, thinking, I have to admit, she even rejected me in the same way. Things were starting to get out of control, and he even started observing her responses. Meanwhile, Jaibon finally met with his wife. The two were so busy with their work that they hardly saw each other or spent time together. There was no chemistry between them anymore, so Jaibon wanted things to change. That afternoon, out of nowhere, he proposed having a baby, which shocked her. They had been married for 5 years, and for her it wasn't the right time. When she heard this, Jaibon got angry. She always prioritized her work, even working extra hours, and it seemed like she had stopped being affectionate, not even calling him by his name. He asked, Baba, are you seeing someone else? When she reacted negatively, she simply handed him what she had brought. After that, she left, and Jaibon didn't know what to do. It had been a year since he discovered that she was seeing another man, a researcher who worked with her, but he hadn't confronted her yet, afraid she would ask for a divorce. On the other hand, Jia was leaving work, and it was already very late when she ran into Joming. He asked, Why are you leaving? You've only been sleeping for 3 hours, and now you have to go back? But she replied that she'd rather rest in her bed, even if it was just for half an hour, which excited Juming. He told her, You're not like her, so at least today, from what I observed, you're not like the one I thought you were. After that, he left, leaving her completely confused. The following days, after a long work day, Jian called his mother to take care of his little soul for the night. He had received a message from his ex, Sonyeon, telling him that she was getting married. Some time ago, he had broken up with Sonyeon because he needed to take care of Sol and didn't want to burden her with that responsibility, even though she was eager to care for Sol. Supposedly, he had distanced himself because Sonyeon's parents weren't happy with the situation. In short, he sent her away to fulfill her parents' wishes and marry someone they chose. Now, the woman who used to be his love was getting married. So, in this moment of confusion, he decided to clear his mind by watching a movie at the cinema. And right there he ran into Jia, who was also planning to watch a movie, a horror one. She invited him to watch it with her. She noticed and thought to herself how handsome her neighbors were. Maybe she had done something right to deserve such company. They continued watching the movie, and Jia acted very brave. Afterward, as they were leaving, he offered to drive her home, but she preferred to walk since she had gained a few pounds from eating so much. He jokingly said he was a liposuction specialist and could offer her a treatment, to which she laughed and replied that she didn't need it because she was still very slim. They ended up going in the same car, and Jia thought to herself how different he was from Jia Ming. Both arrived at the building, and Jia Ming, who had just arrived, saw them together. He stayed watching and realized that he wasn't the only one interested in Jia. The next day, Jia had to give something to the boss, who, it seemed, was in a bad mood. As Jia Ming had predicted, he didn't keep his personal life separate and asked Jia how the movie with Haijun had been. He even concluded that Jia seemed to like sweet guys. But at least, he thought, she should give him some time too. Days passed, and one night, unexpectedly, the cockroach discovered where Jia lived and showed up at her place, drunk. Jia went outside because he was causing a huge scene. She wanted him to leave, but he insisted on apologizing until she finally hit him. He was so drunk he was even about to vomit, and just then, Jia's hero appeared. Jia Ming, starting by taking out the trash. But the more he hurt him, the worse it got. Eventually he vomited, and unfortunately it was all over Jia Ming. Poor guy. Meanwhile, that same night, Jaibon arrived home feeling lost, not knowing what to do with his life. He started drinking heavily, and when his wife arrived, he felt a surge of anger. To make matters worse, he noticed a different scent on her. It seemed like the perfume of someone else had rubbed off on her. The next day, like the foolish cockroach he was, he ended up sleeping on the balcony, freezing. He thought he was in Jia's house, but he wasn't. He was at the house of Jia's future husband. Envy consumed him as he watched the beautiful people around him. That's when things started to spiral out of control. Jia Jun called his brother and asked if they could arrest someone who had broken into his house. Of course, this idiot hadn't entered voluntarily. But when he heard that he could face 2 years in prison for it, he panicked and ran off, thinking he wouldn't pursue Jia anymore. When he saw her, he apologized and left, as though his soul was being dragged away. Just then, Jia Ming appeared, visibly upset, unable to understand how someone like Jaibon could have spent 5 years with that fool and not given him a chance. Meanwhile, Jinyon Yang was meeting with her husband. Jaibon wanted to know when she had been seeing someone else. She told him that she had known for about a year, or maybe even longer. He didn't know that she had been seeing him for 3 years. He asked when it had all started, and she explained that it was on May 6, 3 years ago, when she lost their child. She told him she was trying to be a good wife now since her job was stable, but before, she didn't have time for her. She had suffered after losing the pregnancy, and even though he had heard her crying in the bathroom, he never bothered to ask her what was wrong. She asked him why he had never shared anything with her. The truth was, when she tried to talk to him, he would tell her he didn't have time for anything. Once, she asked for just 5 minutes, but he told her to let him rest and give him space when he came home. It felt like he was tired of her. Maybe she had some fault in all of this, but she wasn't the only one. Later, she left. That evening, Jinon met up with the person she had been seeing. She told him that Jaibon had found out about them, but he couldn't understand their situation. For her, it was just an affair. They had never been intimate, but the fact that she had a connection with another man was enough to call it cheating. She went out drinking with him, had dinner, and even texted him when she needed someone. To Jinon, her marriage was over. She and Jaibon had grown distant, but she didn't know when it had all fallen apart. That night, Jia came home to find that her husband had already packed and was ready to leave. He handed her the divorce papers and said they should end it peacefully, unless she wanted him to report her for having an affair. She immediately signed the papers and he left. She wanted to talk to him, but to him the worst betrayal was losing their child and having the father not even find out. It seemed like this other man had known first. He questioned whether he had ever even considered him a husband, or at least a human being. Jaibon was hurt, grabbing her and asking why. Why did she do this? Had she waited to tell him everything just to make him suffer? If that was her intention, then so be it. She had ended things with him that day. The next few days passed and the weekend arrived. That morning, Jian arrived at Jia's place with little Seol to visit. He wanted them to come along to the park because he always ended up fighting with other parents, so Jia went as his supervisor. She really enjoyed spending time with Seol, while Jian just kept staring at his phone. Then Jia's phone rang, and she asked Jian to look after Seol for a moment. As soon as she left, the drama started. A kid started fighting with Seol and pushed her. Jian saw the situation and punched the kid. The boy's mother showed up furious, and Jian didn't have the tact to handle the situation properly. They started arguing, but Jia arrived just in time to stop Jian and took over, speaking to the woman. She told her that her son had pushed Seol, and, as the mother, she should apologize. If she did, then Jia and Jian would apologize as well. After the confrontation, they went home. Seol had fallen asleep, and Jia wondered if she had made a mistake. But Jian held her hand and suggested that the next day he would take her to the cinema. The next night, they went to the movies. Jia wasn't sure what to order for snacks during the movie, which seemed to offend Jian. Apparently with Haejun it had been different. When she was with him, she knew exactly what to ask for and understood him better. This made Jian wonder why she didn't want to eat with him. But after that, they continued watching the movie, and at one point Jian leaned in, seeming as though he was about to kiss her, but no, he just wanted her to focus on the movie. However, he quickly added that once the movie was over, she could kiss him as much as she wanted. After the movie, they headed to his car, and the desire for a kiss took over. They kissed passionately, giving in to their feelings. The following night, Jaebon invited Haejun and Jian to drink with him. They knew Jaebon wasn't doing well, and as soon as they saw him, they realized something was wrong. They asked if he had fought with his wife, and they hit the nail on the head. They started drinking heavily, and out of nowhere, Jaebon told them that they should never fall in love or get married because it's a disaster. But he never told them exactly what had happened. He tried to take a breather but saw a young man scratching his car. In his anger, Jaebon threatened to report him or make him pay for the damage or face jail time for 3 years. The young man started crying, saying that Jaebon had hit him. Jaebon really did want to hit him to make him feel the pain. But luckily, they didn't let him do anything he might regret later. What seemed like something simple to fix ended up turning into a huge scandal, but fortunately he was stopped before making a bigger mistake. After that, they wanted answers. What exactly was going on? Jaebon confessed that he was going to divorce his wife. The days passed, and on the runway, Ja had to deal with a very arrogant model. Kika knew exactly how to inflate this guy's ego, but Ja hated having to compliment him for being just a regular guy. The photos began, and everything seemed to be going fine until it was time to exchange watches. This model seemed very interested in the prices. Ja knew he was going to ask for a free one and accidentally blurted out that, unfortunately, all watches had to be returned to the sponsor. This made him furious, wondering when he had ever asked for a watch. After that, the guy became increasingly arrogant, acting as if he were the best. He started making Jia's life miserable by demanding that she bring him coffee. Kimbex wanted to go buy it, but this little man wanted the coffee served by a woman because apparently it tasted better that way. Thus began the torment. No coffee was ever good enough. Jia brought one after another, but then the fool managed to spill one all over the carpet. The whole place had been rented for the photo shoot, and replacing the carpet would be expensive. Chia panicked as she tried to clean it up, and the model was thrilled, telling everyone that he never wanted to work with the runway again. Soon, the boss arrived. Seeing Jia on her knees, he lost his patience. He heard that the model didn't want to work with them anymore and thought about suing him for breaching the contract and for the financial damage. He would also have to repay the ridiculous amount they paid him for his photos. Additionally, he would have to pay for the damages to the suite, including the humiliation caused to the workers. With that, Jian ended the photo shoot. But then, the agent of the celebrity model talked to Jian. The photo shoot ended without any more issues, and everyone started leaving, but Jia stayed alone with him. He told her that he was doing all of this for her because if it had happened with anyone else, he wouldn't have cared. He also told her that he had already finished his period of observing her, but before leaving he asked, "Can I have feelings for you?"